God bless, Ma'am. I am Maria Sheila Flores Villarenti, BSMT second year student, and I'll be discussing the ethical philosophy of Saint Thomas Aquinas. Aquinas wrote most extensively about natural law. He stated the light of reason is placed by nature and thus by God in everyone to guide him in his acts. Saint Aquinas also believed that human beings possess with intrinsic values that govern the reasoning and behavior of the human, where it also speaks here that natural law maintains that these rules of right and wrong are inherent in people and are not created by society or court or judges. So, Saint Thomas Aquinas, his ethical philosophy has four distinct. So, Saint Thomas Aquinas' ethical philosophy was divided into four subtopics or law. These are the exiguus non diretur, the conscience and natural law, the three contemporary question, and the relational and perfection of love in Aquinas. So in exiguus non diretur, or translated into English as if there were no God, it is a law which an impression that highlights the validity of ethical system with or without faith in the Creator God. And the conscience in natural law, he also stated here that conscience remains to be our proximate norm that bids us to do good and avoid evil. And here in three contemporary question, he also stated here that self is not only a passive receiver of what transpires externally, and one designs the path and cooperates with the situation to reach the end that has been reasonably set by ourselves. And in his last law, he stated here that the relational and perfection of love in Aquinas, which he states that the highest perfection of man for Saint Thomas is in his or her wanting to be with God. So here in exiguus non diretur, or we can, if we translate it in English, as if there were no God, Thomas Aquinas here begins from the standpoint of faith towards God, and his perspective proposes the existence of God, who is the author and the goal of all reality. So by this means, this creator for Thomas, however, relates in freedom with the human person and so enables him in freedom to recognize through reason and the very principle of foundations of all things. So we all know that the foundation of all things in this life are reasons. We did things because we have reasons. And also, in accordance with this foundational knowledge, the human person can choose to act in such a way that is worthy by one's very reality. So the human being then is said to be gifted with the ability to know the highest good that engages him or her in freedom in choosing to act on the good and she ought to do. So we have freedom, we have the free will to do whatever we want to do in our life. So freedom here is knowing the best goal and being able to reach for it through decisive action. So this expressed interiorly that is in the very heart of every human person as the dictate of doing good and avoiding evil. So at the end of the day, we still have the power, we still have the freedom to choose of what would be the thing that we want to do in our life. Either we do a good thing or do a bad thing. So for Aquinas, God reveals his goodwill as the external law reflected in the order of reality, relating with the law as governing all is relating with God himself, whose will emanates to govern all that it is. So the reality then of life is growth, nutrition, and reproduction is founded on the will that is eternal. So by this means, even the reality of sensitive consciousness is ruled by the instinct that is true of animals is also in accordance with the same will. So, like the plants persist to carry themselves out the fullness of being plants is an imprint of the divine will, and that comes to human understanding as law. So we ought to do what our purpose of existing in this world. And also that animals governed by instincts behave in such a way is also recognized by the human person as following the dictate of a law that guides all of creation. Human freedom for Saint Thomas, therefore, is an imprint of the divine will in the very being of the human person. So this sharing of human reason in the eternal will or divine law is for him the natural law. So the human person then, who is able to draw up specific laws that govern himself or her society and her relationship with all creation, is also the author of positive laws. So not all that is legal in human society reflects the law that dictates on the human person as ethical in accordance with natural law. What is legal then isn't always necessarily moral. So, Exegeus non retour is an expression that highlights the validity of this ethical system with or without faith in Creator God. Literally, Exegeus non retour, it means that even if there is no God. So this implies that the wisdom of the ethical system that is natural law is valid and binding for the human person even if we bracket belief in God. The next law of ethical philosophy of St. Thomas Aquinas is the conscience and natural law. The ability of man to know is important in his acting ethically. Hence, if one follows St. Thomas' discussion on conscience, one is inclined to conclude that it is the proper functioning of reason in moving the human person towards an end goal that is fitting of his dignity. So, one cannot do the right thing if one does not know what it is. This is absolutely true. We cannot do something if we don't know what we do, if we don't understand what we are gonna do, if we don't know the purpose of doing it, right? So, even if he does not know, he is obliged to know. If one acts badly out of ignorance and does not act to rectify the situation by bothering to learn, that person is to be held accountable according to the angelic doctor. So, it is true that if someone acts badly out of ignorance and that person didn't rectify the situation by learning something from it, so this means that that person is accountable to his action. So while the conscience absolutely binds us in doing the good and avoiding evil, conscience as reason is also absolutely tasked to be given formation. So the conscience, therefore, can be mistaken, and being so does not exempt the human person from culpability. So if he or she is able to know but fails to act in his obligation to do so, then he is not free from blame and responsibility for what was done. So there are different kinds of conscience that may lead us to wrongdoing. This includes pecunious, perplexed, scrupulous, and ignorant. The uninformed conscience simply lacks education, while the perplexed one needs guidance in sorting out one's confusion. Precarious and scrupulous are binary opposites, but both are malformed in being too lax or too strict. consciousness of the conscience results in the long-time persistence in doing evil that the self is no longer concerned with whether what he or she does is good or bad. So, in this point, we can conclude that we will become blinded by our actions. We will be blinded by the reality whether we did good or bad. We cannot identify. So scrupulousness, on the other hand, fails to trust one's ability to do good, and hence overly concerns itself with avoiding what is bad to the point of seeing wrong where there really is none. Like we become more tense, more we always feel panicked. So if one thinks about it, these different consciences that lead to badness in action can readily be rectified by education. Putting effort in forming one's own conscience helps a person to exit from such malformations. So if we are aware of these things, we become more now informed, more now aware of our actions. We become more we have realization. Such propensity to error of the human conscience, can we then disobey the dictates of our conscience? Saint Thomas Aquinas still insists, it is absolutely not. So conscience remains to be our proximate norm that bids us to do the good and avoid evil. Simply put, going against one's conscience is doing the contrary of the dictate of what one knowingly elects as good. So, if the extent of what one knows determines what is the good to be done and the evil to be avoided, so then the self is obliged to act accordingly. Like for example, act on the good and shun the bad. That's it. So these occasions again show the importance of the commitment to educate one's conscience, and basically because one cannot do good if one does not know it, right? So, and since one's norm for acting is the obligation that is set by one's conscience, acquisition of knowledge as what ought to be done through education is critical for ethical living. This is according to Saint Thomas Aquinas. The next law of Saint Thomas Aquinas' ethical philosophy is the three contemporary questions. So, in these subtopics, there will be three questions that what we person ought to have an answer. So, there are relevant questions that can help the Filipino student appreciate the mystic natural law. If we follow what has been earlier said, like that natural law is man's participation in the execution of the good and avoidance of evil through the use of his or her reason and will. Then, three questions that originated from the writing of Alasdair Macintyre and can be appropriated to highlight the relevance of Aquinas today. These are: who am I? Who do I want to be? And how can I get there? So, who am I? Domestic natural law interrogates the identity of the human person. So, if one is endowed with his or her own facticity, history, and abilities, his or her present reality is accessible to him through self-knowledge and reflection. So, by this means, this assessment of one's own strengths and weaknesses is critical in being able to do good and avoid evil. So this ethical task is not only an outward truth, but doing good also determines the actor in a reality that is good, and doing bad malforms us. So the reality of human identity is that it is something defined, yet also always in process. So the task of knowing the self is the point of departure for the task of building up the identity of the human person. So in doing something there will be departure of who we are, departure of like there's something to live on for adopting the new one. So ethics for Aquinas is primarily a question of human identity. All human acts are moral acts. Aquinas said, since it is through his or her act that man defines himself or herself, the ethical man is the task of his or her free acts. So it was clearly stated there. So defining the self gives one chance to clarify his or her goal. Hence, it is important to raise the second question. So that's why this second question exists. Who do I want to be? So the human person's self-knowledge is dynamic. That is, it is always open to the direction set by what one wants to make of himself or herself. So self-knowledge here is malleable towards self-determination. Ethical acts give direction to freedom to build up the real towards a particular goal. And the human reason is so gifted that it is able to discern through options and daily realities. So this what makes the human gifted is that God gave us discernment and realizations towards our experience that we have learned every day. So decisions are the basis of one's freedom in choosing what one wants to be. The self also considers the truthful transition to what one ought to be. So given this knowledge of ourselves, the ability to evaluate ourselves' options and possibilities, the self can also better give direction to our own self. So the third question is not very far from the other questions. And truth, how can I get there? So we have different goals, different dreams, different journey to go. So we sometimes ask ourselves, how can we get there? So also fully utilizes the sound judgment of human reason and evaluates the best route to get to the goal decided upon. So the last question, this question breaks down the task to be done into the particulars of actions and daily routine. This includes self-knowledge and self-determination are here bridged by self-governance. So how we govern ourselves depends on the self-knowledge and determination that we have, that how we want to achieve, how we want to get there to our destination. So the human person does not only reason to assess his or her personal identity and personal goal. We are also gifted with the will to command the self to go through the steps and be able to do the transition from knowledge to a fully determined self. So every day we want to become the very best version of us. We want to become the smart one. We want to be someone that we can say that this is me, that we are proud of ourselves. So goal setting through reason and decision is complemented by the ability to freely move the self and command the body in action. So it is in orchestrating the actions to be consistent with the end in mind that the self reaches improvement. Furthermore, our self is not only a passive receiver of what transpires externally. One designs the path and cooperates with the situation to reach the end that has been reasonably set by the self. So the last subtopics is the relational imperfection of love in Aquinas. So although we have suspended God talk to make the case that natural law is relevant even for the human person without faith, the discussion of Thomistic ethics is incomplete if it does not end with the love that is directed towards God. theophany of ethics from faith afforded a level of discipline reflection that enables man to not only copy the perfection that is God and apply it to himself and her surroundings. The independence that is given in the ethical order also allows the human person in particularity to be himself as the singular subject that he or she is. So that is like through personal reflection, decision, and goal setting, and the human person attains to full realization of who we are. So because of our personal experiences, because of our goal setting and our decisions and personal reflection, we will be able to know and to identify ourselves if who we are or what kind and type of person we are. In this sense, the human being is not merely a stand-in for the Creator of God. The subjectivity of man and one's search for fulfillment readily grasp the decisions and voluntarily willing that one makes. On the other hand, however, the divine will and also the entirety of all creation cannot be limited by the scope of satisfaction that is exclusively chosen by a man. The human beings remains to be one particular being among the multiplicity of beings. One cannot give in one's limits and be the fulfillment of everything. So human beings are not capable of desiring all in all because they are limited. So still humans are limited. We don't have supernatural powers to do anything we want. We can't fly whatever we want. The human person is not only bound to find full maximum capacity of one's being in a search of self-actualization. He or she is not designed to find perfection on his or her own, but thoroughly relates with other human persons and all of creation. So, at the end of the day, we still need, at the end of the day, no man is an island. So, also, he or she is not designed to be a Pharisee who is perfect unto himself. He is not open to be in all and to exist for all, one's goal. Therefore, it is not only to be the self-made man or woman, but in our full effort, like be open and available for everything else, and be open for the love or fullness that is beyond in us. So ultimately, as held by St. Thomas himself, the true destiny of man lies in a gratuitous perfection that is beyond the human person, yet relates with him thoroughly in freedom, and therefore in fullness of love. So at the end of the day, we still need love in everything, and love is everything. So this relationship and loving invitation exceeds the possibilities of achievements and realization that are reachable with the human person himself. And the highest perfection of man for St. Thomas is his or her wanting to be with God. In other words, that are used by believers, the ethical man is not the perfect man, but one who wants to be saved by cooperating in freedom with what is attainable for him or her. So we should use our freedom to decide good for us, to have a good future, a good life, and to live life with love. So St. Thomas Aquinas was very influential in his articulation, in his theory of natural law. And also he showed us that the universe was determined by an order of love and to define the sense of good and human beings. So that would be all, Mom. God bless and thank you.